We remember a time when Israel and Egypt fought wars. Thousands of people on both sides of the frontier were killed in those wars. We don't want to turn the clock back.
I'm sorry, what was that again, Mark?
We don't want to turn the clock back.
Now, I know a lot of people say we don't need to look back, look forward. Israel looks back.
Henrik Boer is one of the Netherlands' last wanted war crimes suspects. The 88-year-old has evaded this day ever since he fled the Netherlands, where his alleged crimes were committed, for Germany.
It wants every Nazi on the planet in jail and stripped of their assets. And really so. 100%. Who could blame him?
After he was accused in the 1970s of being Ivan the Terrible, a guard at the Treblinka death camp, Demjanjuk was stripped of his U.S. citizenship and first extradited to Israel in 1986.
Well, not them, but who can blame justice from prevailing, right? During the 1967 war with Israel, it was a six-day war, Israel captured 1,200 Egyptians, prisoners, soldiers.
During the 1967 war, the Israelis, they had just captured about 1,200 Egyptian soldiers in the Sinai. They had asked them to dig their own graves, and they shot them.
Now, it is a far stretch to imagine that Israel did not want this to be known, that they had just executed 1,200 prisoners of war. Made them dig their own graves in lots, in groups.
The Israelis had captured several hundred, perhaps as many as 1,000 Egyptian prisoners of war who were being held near the town of El Arish. Now, we passed 12 miles off the coast of El Arish, I think around 10 o'clock that morning. And little did we know, but it happens that they were lining up these prisoners, requiring them to dig their own graves in the desert sand, and then they'd jump in and the Israelis would machine gun them, and then the next few prisoners would fill a hole in and dig their own.
What does it feel like, I wonder, digging your own grave?
It's funny that some of the Israelis claim that that never happened. If it happened, it would have been in all the newspapers. Well, it was in all the newspapers, or at least it was in Time magazine and U.S. News and World Report. And
not shot in the head, but you're going to get machine gunned.
The Israelis would machine gun them, and then the next few prisoners would fill a hole in and dig their own.
Now, the important part of this puzzle that has to be brought into focus and made into the public light is what I'm trying to do here. The USS Liberty was a reconnaissance intelligence gathering vessel.
If it was broadcast on a radio wave, we could receive it at any frequency, low frequency, high frequency, medium frequency, very low frequency. If it was out there, we could receive it.
That was passing right by the coastline of the Sinai Peninsula when Egypt and Israel was in the 1967 war, at the same time as Israel was executing 1,200 prisoners of war. A serious violation of the Geneva Convention and an atrocious war crime.
Some people suspect the ship might have been overhearing information on Israeli operations in the Sinai.
This is something they don't want you to know about, but there's more to this. So I'm going to let the USS Liberty captain, who finally broke his silence, speak his words to get us started down this path people are unaware of.
In 1997, at Arlington Cemetery, he broke his 30-year silence.
For many years, I had wanted to believe that the attack on the Liberty was pure error. It appears to me that it was not a pure case of mistaken identity. I think that it's about time that the State of Israel and the United States government provide the crew members of the Liberty and the rest of the American people the facts of what happened and why it came about that the Liberty was attacked 30 years ago today.
Lyndon Johnson, the president at the time, I'll let him say it.
And Lyndon Johnson came on. Said he didn't give a damn if the ship sunk. He would not embarrass his allies.
We were guinea pigs to be sunk, and then we could say Egypt and Russia did it. That way the United States could have stepped right in and helped Israel.
Less than 2 years later, McGonigal himself would be buried at Arlington. Shortly before he died, he sent an open letter to President Clinton calling for Israel to acknowledge publicly that her armed forces had deliberately attacked the USS Liberty. The evidence points to Israel knowing the ship's identity and wanting it sunk fast.
We had heard that, like at 5 in the morning, or around that time, that the planes were buzzing us.
The Israeli aircraft seemed to be identifying the ship as belonging to their ally, America.
There were about 9 different occasions that airplanes came out, and probably 12 times that were circled, 12 separate orbits of the ship during the morning.
The decks above were being shredded. Attempts to send an SOS message failed. The Liberty's frequencies were being jammed.
You'd have to know what frequencies we were going to come up on. To know that, you'd have to know that we were an American ship.
The last thing I remember is the captain on the intercom system saying, "Stand by for torpedo attack, starboard side."
So, torpedo attack, we waited, and they said it went by. And this went on like 3 different times, 4 different times.
The torpedo is simply dropped into the water. You lose sight of it for a minute, and then you see the wake, and it was going straight for the ship, and we were sure that our torpedo was the one that hit.
It hit, and it lifted the ship right out of the water and put it down, and we started to list 10 degrees.
We basically were dead in the water. The word came down, prepare to abandon ship. I went up first, popped the hatch, looked out for the life rafts. They were either gone or burning. And at the same moment, I looked to the stern of the ship, and I saw one of the torpedo boats methodically machine gunning one of our life rafts that had floated back. We cut the life rafts loose because they were burning or had been damaged. And they floated back behind us, and he was machine gunning the life raft.
These guys didn't die for anything. They just died. They were slaughtered for nothing.
Because at that point, President Johnson and I and Dean Rusk, we had to be in a position that we could obtain the support of the American people and the Congress for applying military force in support of Israel.
If the USS Liberty had sunk, you could have used that to Congress and the American people to get them into a war, right? Is that a fair stretch? Hell, that's what they done in Vietnam, wasn't it? Now declassified, the Gulf of Tonkin. They blamed the Vietnamese for attacking the American ship, and no attack happened. But the media spread it, and 58,000 Americans died, 1 million Vietnamese died, and that place is the most toxic, one of the most toxic wastelands on this planet, from Agent Orange and everything else. But, little did they know, the SOS did get out because the troops on that boat re-established an antenna while being shot at.
But her desperate SOS message had been picked up by the American 6th Fleet, 500 miles away off Crete. Retaliation was ordered for the attack. On the USS America, 2 bombers were readied while their fighter escort was launched.
Those aircraft were brought forward, and I believe they were launched before we went into Condition November.
Condition November meant that nuclear-armed A-4 bombers were to be used. Incredibly, the US was about to launch a nuclear strike against Egypt, the Liberty's presumed attacker.
The US Liberty is being attacked by Israel, and what happens? They send nuclear weapons into Egypt. This was the plan. Now, Israel just committed a serious war crime, 1,200 dead people. One of those weapons could have been meant to turn that Sinai Peninsula into a sheet of glass, and there would be no 1,200 executed prisoners found to come back and haunt Israel. That's what they were going to do, folks. They were going to go in and turn the cyanide into a sheet of glass to get rid of Israel's war crime and attack Egypt. Of course, Mubarak came along and he played ball with Israel for the next 40 years, right? That's evil, man. That's evil. Kill all these people so Israel can get Jerusalem. That's what this was all about. So Israel can get his hands on Jerusalem and the Golan Heights. So every Jew can go pray at the crying wall.
There was a flash message, as I recall, from one of the carriers that said they had launched ready aircraft. The launching of ready aircraft, you understand, that is typically nuclear-armed aircraft.
Cairo was about to be incinerated. The US Embassy was told that an attack was coming. Richard Parker was the political consul.
There was this message that the Navy was preparing to retaliate against Egypt for the attack on the Liberty. They thought that it was the Egyptians who attacked it. They were preparing to attack Egypt in response.
The Defense Secretary himself came on the line.
McNamara directed Comm 6 Fleet to recall the aircraft, and Comm 6 Fleet said, "Are you sure?" And he said, "Absolutely certain. Recall the aircraft."
The attack on the Liberty had triggered an extraordinary response. Nuclear-armed planes had been on their way to Cairo. A nuclear strike had been minutes away and had only just been averted. We found evidence that this was part of a larger plan hatched by Israeli and American intelligence to invade Egypt and overthrow Nasser, a plan codenamed Cyanide. A key figure was James Angleton, Israel's closest friend in the CIA, and unique beneficiary of a memorial from Mossad. Jim Ennis first came across cyanide almost by chance.
I had gone to the LBJ library asking for, all Liberty documents, and this one-page paper came out of nowhere. Minutes from the 303 committee.
The 303 committee was a secret group that used to meet at the old executive office building, round the corner from the White House.
303 committee was simply a device for examining covert operations of any kind and making a judgment on behalf of the president so he wouldn't be nailed with the thing if it failed.
And Lyndon Johnson came on. Said he didn't give a damn if the ship sunk. He would not embarrass his allies.
I know there's a lot of smart people out there. So my question is, who in Israel's political spectrum, previous and past and future, participated in those executions?
On Sky News a few days ago, the spokeswoman for the Israeli army, Major Leibovich, was asked about the Israeli killing of, at that time, 800 Palestinians. The total is now 1,000. She replied instantly, 500 of them were militants.
No civilians.
That was the reply of a Nazi. I suppose the Jews fighting for their lives in the Warsaw Ghetto could have been dismissed as militants. The Israeli Foreign Minister, Tzipi Livni, asserts that her government will have no dealings with Hamas because they're terrorists. Tzipi Livni's father was Eitan Livni, Chief Operations Officer of the terrorist Irgun Tzvai Leumi, who organized the blowing up of the King David Hotel in Jerusalem, in which 91 victims were killed, including 4 Jews.
An important visitor was helicoptered aboard. Admiral Isaac Kidd was leading a naval inquiry into the attack. His behavior surprised the sailors.
I thought he was a very strange person because he took his stars off.
He took his eagles off, and he says, "Well, guys," he says, "you just pretend that I'm one of you guys now. Tell me all about it." So they told what they seen in that, and after a while, he put his pins back on, and he says, I don't want you guys talking about this at all to anybody, to your shipmates. Don't be giving any interviews here while we're in Malta. He says anything that has to be told through your division officer, through your captain. Don't be talking to your family about. I mean, he was very specific.